welcome to episode 2 of the Wellness Realised podcast. I'm Nadine McCabe from EmpowerPlan, and we've got Justin with us from the Kanban.
Thanks, Nadine. It's good to be back.
It is, isn't it? Today we've got a brand new topic to talk about. So, Justin, do you want to tell the listeners what we're going to be talking about today?
Indeed, we are today looking at catastrophizing.
Indeed we are. So catastrophizing, I think we're all guilty of it at some point in our lives, aren't we? Or even pretty much on a weekly basis every now and then. Those catastrophic thoughts will come into our minds from time to time, but it can be a problem for many people in terms of the amount of catastrophizing that they do and their thought process. Basically, it's a form of cognitive distortion, isn't it? So
yeah,
how would you describe catastrophizing? How would you give examples to listeners so that they know what we're talking about, really?
I would start by saying I think I'm a recovering catastrophizer. Is that a real word in dictionary?
It is now.
So I would say absolutely, it's something that I can relate to, that I know that I have a habit of myself. And my own definition of how it shows up in my life is when there is a reaction to an event, to something that happens, or something someone said, or maybe the subject of an email that lands in my inbox, and I look at it. And then from that simple action or event, a chain of thoughts are created in my mind that spiral off into catastrophe, hence the word catastrophizing. And I think it's something that in another context or with a more balanced thought process is simply the fact of, hey, there's an email with that as the subject header, or oh, look, that person in that car who, I accidentally cut off further back on the motorway appears to be following me now. And that could just be data. But I think catastrophizing head version of me takes that through several other steps involving them, tracking me down at night and coming after me with an axe, or, now clearly that email with that subject header means I'm about to be sacked from my job. So it's also something that reminds me of the story of chicken licking when I was a child. Do you remember that?
Chicken licking. It does ring a bell, Justin, but you're going to have to just refresh my memory on that one.
Well, chicken licking, it's a bit like the boy that cried wolf, really. The story about chicken licking was this character. Funnily enough, it was a chicken. And I know that's a sort of, shock horror. You'd have thought it. This character used to, from what I remember, run about the farmyard saying, quick, the sky's falling in, everybody, we're doomed, we're going to die. And no matter what happened, Chicken Licking thought the sky was going to fall in. And it never did. But the worry that it generated, the effect that it had on other animals, but more importantly, poor Chicken Licking, his or her quality of life, I'm sure, was impaired. And that's why this could be an issue for some of us, is when we catastrophize about things that are not yet and may never be a catastrophe, we're sort of wasting energy on it, aren't we?
Yeah, it is definitely wasted energy. It really does have such a massive impact on somebody's well-being and somebody's way of life and the quality of life that they can have, because of their just a simple thought process of something that hasn't even happened yet. But unfortunately, people can very easily slip into that thought process. And there are a number of reasons for that, really. I mean, like you said, you explained a simple email coming into your inbox, and I suppose the trigger for that is ambiguity. You've not seen the whole picture, so that automatically it leaves room for thoughts to start coming into your mind and thinking, well, could it mean this, or could it mean that? And if you're that way inclined and your thought process is that way inclined, or your moods, you're in that sort of mood as well, because I think moods can have an effect on whether you catastrophize at certain points. Your mind just tends to take things a little bit too far, doesn't it, sometimes? And also, like, another thing that might affect or come into play is how much value you place on something. So like you were describing that job in the email, if you really love your job and it's the best job you've ever had, and it's something that if you lost your job, it would absolutely devastate you, then that can have an impact. So if you're putting such a huge value on something, that can cause you to catastrophize a little bit. Yeah, and there's I suppose fear as well. Fear plays a massive part in whether or not we catastrophize. If you're afraid of something, and it's another trigger, isn't it?
I think, you're saying there about it being about something usually that means a lot to us. And I guess if it's something that we value, and that could be a person, something happening to a person we love, or something happening to us, or a way of life that has a lot of purpose for us, we tend not, I imagine, to catastrophize about things we don't really care that much about. So I think some of the catastrophizing that I know I've engaged in the past has been more to do with sort of what if ... and finishing that sentence. What if this happened? What if things got really bad? What if nobody wants this thing that I've produced? What if suddenly this thing that I want to do is no longer available? And what if I got sick? Or what if I'm late?
You see, I don't think the what ifs are that bad, are they? Because as long as your what ifs are then followed up by a, well, it might not happen. I suppose the real problems occur when it stops becoming a what if and a belief that is going to happen.
That's a good distinction there, because the belief that it's going to be a catastrophe, the belief that bad stuff is probably going to happen, then becomes the framework that we operate in. And from that viewpoint, we might limit ourselves, maybe choose behaviors that are not particularly resourceful, because we're holding on to this belief that bad stuff will happen.
Yeah, that's it. Somebody who catastrophizes, if they've come out of a relationship, that they've had a relationship that hasn't lasted, and they've come out of that relationship, their automatic response is not just going to be that particular relationship wasn't right. It's going to be that they're completely unlovable and that nobody's going to love them. It's taking it to that extreme, a complete and utter belief of something that's unrealistic, I suppose, and distorted.
So I know I said I'm a recovering catastrophizer. I say recovering because I feel like it's a work in progress, really. Like you said, it's just checking in, countering that what if, or that belief with, well, what are the facts, and what does the data say, and what is that reasonable? And actually, how do you know when you might be doing some catastrophizing? Would that be useful to share?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you'd know when you're sort of getting into that area and that you've got a problem. I think if you do constantly find yourself having those what if moments, but then taking it to an extreme, and I think it's that extreme when you step over into that extreme where you're constantly feeling you've got this belief that bad things are going to happen, that bad things always happen, that that constant feeling of that, I think you're into dangerous territory, really, because catastrophizing, it's linked so heavily to anxiety disorders and depression. That way of thinking can lead to more severe mental health issues.
Definitely. It seems like when I reflect back on times when I have indulged in some catastrophizing, I think it's felt like anxiety. It's felt quite an anxious place to be, rather than a low mood or depressed place. So
anxiety, to a certain degree, we all need to experience a certain level of anxiety. It's kind of a healthy thing to have. It's what keeps you safe. Our bodies are designed to experience a certain amount of anxiety. But again, as with anything, it's when it's taking it to beyond a manageable level. I suppose, and to an extreme. Everything's felt in an extreme.
Yeah. I know that when we approach that sort of topic, thinking in a catastrophic way, or leaping from one or two signs to, well, that clearly now means this, that sort of fuzzy thinking. I think often within mindfulness programs and mindfulness teaching, we refer to this idea of negative automatic thoughts. And NATs is a shorthand for that, but negative automatic thoughts, in that, I mean, thoughts are only negative in the sense that they are distorted. You mentioned distortion earlier on, and that they're not always supported by the things that we know to be true. But in the moment, we might not question them. We might accept them as facts and take them on as beliefs.
Yeah.
And automatic, the phrase in mindfulness that we use, negative automatic thoughts, is we haven't sort of laid out the welcome mat and said, please come in with these thoughts. They just pop up. They're automatic in that they come into our mind without any effort or invitation. And because of that automatic nature, that they seem to just pop up from nowhere, they can also be at times a bit difficult to address or to stop. And probably stopping them altogether is impossible anyway, stopping them happening.
Yeah, it's the same with anything, isn't it? It's getting things to a manageable level. And managing things. You have to manage anxiety. You're never going to fully get rid of it. You have to manage your negative thoughts, because you're always going to have some form of negative thoughts. Who wants to be positive all the time anyway? So yeah, I think it's just getting things onto a more manageable level, isn't it? And I suppose you've tapped into a very useful thing there in that acknowledgement. So that's the first step to preventing catastrophizing, really, is that acknowledgement that you are actually having a catastrophic thought, recognizing it and acknowledging it before you can even start putting things into place and questioning it and challenging it. To a certain degree, you've got to acknowledge it first and know when you recognize when it's happening for you.
And I think for me, in my experience of catastrophizing in the past, a signal to me that in the moment I am having a somewhat catastrophic thought is that I will have a shift in my mood. So I will perhaps be hyper aroused, anxiousness, anxiety will creep in. Or it almost might be the freeze, not flight or fight, but the freeze, the rabbit in the headlights feeling of, I'm now really thinking about how bad this could be and how bad this might get. And what if it goes on unchecked and it will be a disaster? But then there's that frozen sort of, quite numbed out place that we can get to where we don't take any action and we feel a bit helpless. So often when I've noticed that my mood has changed in the past, I've tried to reflect on, well, what was running through my mind at that moment? What thoughts were going through my mind? What thoughts were I having? To become aware of those changes in the thought patterns and to identify the thought that's underlying this feeling of helplessness or feeling stuck or feeling, highly charged. Yeah. And then as a next step after that awareness that you said about, I think is needing to perhaps hold a bit of a torch to that thought and shine it brightly on it, because it might have, dark crevices and corners, to say, well, what's the evidence for this thought that I've got to, this belief that I've got?
Yeah.
What else might be going on here? Perhaps some reframing, some of those techniques from coaching and other fields. What else could be causing this? What other reasons are there for what might have happened? And at its most simple level, often I encourage people within mindfulness at the Calm Barn to ask themselves, what's the effect of thinking about this situation in the way that you are? Describe to me, what does it feel like to think about it in this way? And are you enjoying that? And that often, your body. Yeah, you can feel it in the body, and you can perhaps then think, well, if I'm not really enjoying how I'm thinking about this, maybe I want to think about it a bit differently. And I've made it sound quite simple there. Of course, it's not always that simple to explore what faulty thinking we might have there, that distortion.
I think it's there's a method that somebody had once said to me when somebody's in the midst of having that thought, and the moment they've thought, I'm catastrophizing here, I'm thinking the worst, I'm thinking too negatively, is just to say out loud or in the mind, stop. Just that one word, just stop. And then it allows the mind to sort of slow and calm, and then it allows the other processes to come in place. But just saying to yourself, stop, as firmly as you can, just sort of, it puts a halt on that train, so to speak, that train of thought, and allows you then to then derail it, or start to derail it, and move on to something else, and put those questions into place as to, well, what's the worst that could happen? Is it happening now? If it's not happening now, what's the likelihood that it's going to happen? And really questioning it, and really rationalizing that thought, and putting other things into place. Well, what could happen on a better level? What's the better outcome that could happen? And then, moving on to that more positive thought process, and trying to redirect yourself. But it's definitely a good way of catching yourself. I think it's just that instant, it gives you that instant freeze you described about the rabbit in the headlights. It sort of puts you there again, but going back the opposite way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It's instead of a rabbit in the headlights, what is it? It's a rabbit with some dark glasses on, sort of looking sideways at the headlights. So it's bearable, it's tolerable, and you can see clearly what's actually going on, rather than being blinded by this, or gripped by this feeling, of catastrophe. So I think I wondered about this, whether is it our own our mind's sort of insurance policy about, if I worry about this now in advance of it actually happening, I'll be prepared for this bad thing when it does happen. Do you think it's that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time we like to be prepared, don't we? But I think a lot of catastrophizing as well can come from a learned behavior. If you've been around very negative people, either growing up or even recently, you can start to pick up on that. And it is quite, negative energy is something that's so easily absorbed, and that negative thought process is something that can be easily picked up on. And I think especially for people who've been around someone who tends to catastrophize and think negatively growing up, they're going to slip more easily into those thoughts in their adult life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would say that's at the heart of my historical catastrophizing. Absolutely. My mother was incredibly good at catastrophizing about health. Now that would be her health, my health, anyone's health that she knew. You couldn't just have sort of a bit of an infected fingernail or something. You were probably going to end up with an amputation. It was going to go gangrenous. It was very much that sort of fodder that I was brought up on. So in my late teens and my early 20s, I've experienced health anxiety at that age, really worrying a lot about things that never happened to me, but actually the catastrophe that I imagined in my head clearly involved all sorts of operations and treatments and things that just weren't really needed. So I think it can definitely shape you if you've had that during your upbringing, for sure. And if you don't guard against it, or sort of look out for something different, like better outcomes for yourself, it could be a place where I would have been stuck for quite a long time.
Thank God you found mindfulness and
absolutely
started working in that area for yourself.
It's been helpful.
I know there's in terms of the members area that the members can access with EmpowerPlan, there's some mindfulness worksheets that they can download, and one of them is the leaves on the stream exercise. So I think this one is quite a good one for dealing with this kind of thing. Do you want to explain to people what the leaves on the stream exercise is in terms of mindfulness?
Absolutely, it's great. It's an exercise where you just picture yourself sitting next to a stream. And by the way, you don't have to be a really visual thinker to be able to do this, because I know sometimes when I say things like, picture yourself sitting on a sandy beach, people say, well, I'm not really a visual thinker. I can't bring to mind a particular beach. Which beach? Is the sun out? I tell you what, sometimes if you're not particularly a visual thinker, just sort of maybe with your eyes closed, if it's helpful, just bring to mind just the sense of sitting somewhere quite peaceful that happens to be beside some water. But if you are more of a visual thinker, you can fill in as much detail and color as you want to with this mental image. But you're sitting beside a stream and you are just observing the stream flowing in whatever direction you like, left to right or right to left. And there is a tree overhanging this particular stream, and then leaves drop off the tree onto the stream's surface, and they're gradually carried along as the stream makes its way from left to right or right to left. And each time you have a thought during this exercise, the invitation is to, in your mind's eye, place that thought on a leaf, no matter what that thought is that pops up. So these ideas about automatic thoughts that just pop up from nowhere, like, have I left the gas on? Or did I renew my insurance? Or, oh, I must remember to look out for that new series on Netflix. Whatever it is, that is a thought. Put that thought on a leaf, sort of label it as you do so, if you can. So classifying it as something that it is, like planning, worrying, remembering, daydreaming, whatever. And then in your mind's eye, just see that thought on that leaf and watch it move along the stream. The idea here isn't to really stir up the water and sort of push away the leaf with the thought on it. We're just going to let the natural flow of the stream carry it away. And we're observing that process sitting beside the stream. And this is one of those things with mindfulness, is paying attention in the moment to the thoughts that we're having as an observer, without needing to, I suppose, indulge those thoughts when they're really maybe lovely thoughts and really pleasant. We might want to cling on to those thoughts. I don't want to put it on a leaf, thanks very much. I want to hold on to that. It's a lovely memory of, my recent holiday. Or you might want to push away thoughts that we'd rather not be having, which might be, worrying. But with each thought that pops up, you just place it on a leaf and let it go. And sometimes, in real life, a stream, if you ever watch a stream, it will have leaves or sticks and things floating past on it. And at different points, streams can get a bit blocked. They can be little moments where leaves are collected, and then just perhaps then a bigger twig comes along and nudges those leaves and they move away. We are just letting those leaves go in their own way down this stream in our mind's eye. And that's the exercise. And as you do the exercise, the other thing I encourage people to do is, if you notice you're having with this worksheet and you try the exercise, then reactions to the exercise, like, oh, this is silly, or, oh, I can't think about leaves, I'm not a good visual thinker. That's a thought too. Pop it on a leaf. So it's a I think it's called a cognitive diffusion technique. I think it might be one of those sort of category of techniques, but it's a useful one, and one that you can pull out the bag anytime you need to, and nobody needs to know you're even using it. It's something you can do just sort of sitting on public transport. You can do it sitting at a meeting, sitting at your desk. As with all things mindfulness, don't use it while you're driving, because your attention needs to be on the road. So yeah, have you had some success with that one, Nadine?
Yeah, I love the leaves on the stream meditation. Absolutely love it. I think it's such a lovely way to, and such an effective way, if you do experience any worries, or you do find your mind wandering off certain directions, just to have that moment of disconnect from those, and just to regain control and just stop things from running away too much with you, and just allow yourself just that bit of time just to allow things to be calm and gather yourself a little bit more and really put things into perspective. I think it's such an effective tool to use. I really do. I do tend to send people to that one quite often, to be fair. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But also there's positive emotion brainstorming as well, which I quite like, is where people can pick 10 positive emotions that they experience the least often and they'd like to experience more, and then deciding that, picking 3 ways, that 3 of those emotions and ways that they can experience that more throughout the day. So it's just introducing some more positive feelings into their day, just to try and overcome this cycle of negativity in somebody's life and thought process. I think it's quite a good way of easing in to better habits within people's mindsets. So I quite like that one as well, getting people to really connect with what positive emotions they like to experience and want more of within their life.
That's great. I love the sound of that. And it opens up possibilities and I think choice around the emotions we experience. And I wonder if, certainly in my upbringing and my education when I went to school, the idea of having choice over what you felt was quite alien. The idea that you could choose emotions. I think I thought from my upbringing and my education that emotions were things that just happened to you and you couldn't invite them in or influence how frequently you had a positive emotion. So I love this idea. And I suppose if you are looking for ways to have a bit more joy, for example, might be one I might choose, then consciously looking out for it and engineering it even into your day means you're more likely to experience it, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think the people are becoming more aware of how much more in control of their own mind and thoughts and stuff people really are, and how much that mind has an influence over everything that's happening within their life. People are becoming more self-aware and more aware of that power within their own mind. As time is moving on, I think, like you say, back when we were younger, it just wasn't, people didn't really think that way, whereas people's eyes are opening up more to mindfulness and the power we've got over ourselves and what we're thinking and feeling now.
Yeah, love that. I think
There's
that's
some
a
great
really positive
resources as
change.
well. So many great resources. There's more and more doctors coming up with new things and new ways to manage things out there, and there's more
Yeah,
self-help books than ever before. Plus, I suppose having different types of media platforms, like now we're producing a podcast for people just to listen to as they're driving along somewhere. We didn't have any of this when we were growing up. We had cassettes or LPs. You couldn't really take your record player in the car with you, could you? Or you had tape and you had your favorite one that you played over and over again. It got chewed up in your old Ford Cortina or whatever they were. Tape
absolutely.
player.
Oh, I remember having some cassette versions of yeah, I'll say who it is. I was going to say a very, very famous self-help person. I can remember having in the late 80s, early 90s, a box set of cassettes of Anthony Robbins. And that was probably my first exposure as a teenager to neurolinguistic programming and just the idea of limiting beliefs and all that sort of thing. And it was something that I really, really listened to over and over and over again. And it really influenced me as a teenager to have more productive, resourceful, healthy habits of mind, really, I would say. But I can still see the cover of those cassettes. And I can still remember some of the ways that I used to listen to it on my Walkman on the way home on the bus. Well, probably not what most 15-year-olds were listening to now.
Oh,
I
this
only
is what I was actually going to say. You're actually quite lucky. Most people only sort of delve into the self-help area when they're getting into their 30s or 40s and they're wanting to really, they're really taking a long, hard look at themselves. Most people in their teens and their 20s that, feel like they're invincible anyway. So you started quite early with that one, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I think I did alternate it with some, some sort of music and stuff as well. But definitely, yeah, I then went on to buy some of his books over the years as well. And, not all of his ideas are necessarily fantastic and appealing to me now, a bit older and wiser. And how I use it, though, some of those core principles does still show up today and has been helpful with catastrophizing, actually, and looking at whether my thinking is always as clean as I think it is, or whether it's a bit fuzzy and a bit faulty. Some of those distortions have crept in.
Yeah. Do you find it easier then to catch yourself now, once you've started catching yourself and you've started realizing that you've got a certain way of thinking? Do you tend to find that when you step into that mode that you catch yourself much quicker?
Yes, absolutely. And it can give me the opportunity to stop that in its tracks. You said earlier about using the word stop. Or it gives me the choice, if I want to really indulge that thought and pursue that line of catastrophe and go there if I want to, although I usually choose not to. So it does, yes, absolutely. And one of the mindfulness techniques that blends really well with that is just the phrase of saying to yourself, I notice I'm having the thought that, and then say the catastrophe thing, the catastrophic thought is a different thing than just saying the catastrophic thought out loud to yourself, because then it feels like it's true and it's a belief.
Yeah.
When you say, as a preface to it, I notice I'm having the thought that blah, 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 it removes some of that power that can have over you, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think anything you can do to take that power away is definitely on to a good start, isn't it? Just to get things changed around and moved around.
Yeah. Just as we were talking about school, though, I have to say my comment to you, Nadine, was going to be they ought to teach this stuff in schools, but do you know what they probably do?
They've started, haven't they? They've started having meditation classes and things, and they've started talking a lot more about thoughts and feelings in schools, because they're realizing that things like this don't just affect adults. Children can catastrophize quite easily as well. It's like a child who watches something scary on TV automatically thinking that that's going to be true. And there's certain levels that children are exposed to all of the things that we're exposed to as grown-ups in terms of their emotional well-being and their thought processes, that they're very much the same, and they do need to be watched. We need to pick up on them a lot earlier, and I think schools are recognizing that now, which is very good.
Yeah. I would say that my son is 10 and he's experienced some mindfulness at school, at primary school. My knowledge of secondary school in terms of being a parent is really limited. So I would hope so. I would hope there's a lot more around well-being actually in the curriculum even than there was when I was at school. And I think it would fit so well with so many topics that are covered at school. And it should probably be part of PE even. I know it's called physical education, but well-being is about the whole body, the whole self, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think you picked up on a good point as well a moment back, where you mentioned you catch yourself, but then you make a conscious thought to, or you decide that you don't want to go there. I suppose there's a good question there in what happens when people do want to go there, when being in a catastrophic thought process is comfortable for them because it's so familiar. They don't want to move away from it, or they may have such a limiting belief about themselves that they're punishing themselves by staying in this way of thinking. I suppose that's when things can become tricky, but it starts to get a little bit more complex then, I suppose.
Knowing you're stuck in a habitual way of thinking or reacting is really, really hard, I suppose, isn't it? It's when you're immersed in it, it is your reality and it is the way that you habitually operate. And I wonder what things would raise our awareness that there are other options, other ways of thinking about this. I suppose helping professionals like you would address that with people.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the rapid transformational therapy, we tend to come across things such as this, where people have got such limiting beliefs and they are punishing themselves, especially with deep depression. We tend to find that people, they want to not feel depressed, but at the same time, there's also this feeling that they're punishing themselves, and they need to punish themselves, so they're more reluctant to let go of it. So sometimes very severe depression can take a while to recover from, really, because they've got this thought of they've got to punish themselves. But we use lots of different methods in rapid transformational therapy. We try to look back into the past experiences that somebody's experienced to give them that limiting belief, and then we work with them to let go of that limiting belief and rationalize and look at where they are now, and see what that limiting belief is doing for their life now, and how they don't need it, and why they needed it back then, but why they really don't need it now, and what their options are now, and really change their thought process about that limiting belief so that they're able to then let go of it. And we work with them, and we keep working with them until they actually say to us, yes, they are ready to let go of it. They are really, they can see it leaving them now. So we do a lot of work, and we can spend quite a bit of time there sometimes with people, really working through that side of things, and until they get to a point where they are actually ready to let go of that belief. And then we then put some new affirmations in place using hypnosis to put some new, more positive beliefs in that are going to serve them better in their life.
Yeah. So until they have that moment when they say, I'm ready to let go of this belief, would you say in your experience with RTT clients that there is a level of familiarity with that way of thinking or the belief, even though it might be hurting them, but it's familiar to me, so actually it's what I know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's several rules of that the mind follows, and one of them is that it's always going to defer to what's familiar. That is going to be its go-to place every single time. And that's one of the reasons why we send the clients home with a recording for 21 days, because we know we can do some exceptional work within a therapy session, but in order for that belief to remain there permanently, they're going to need to listen to that recording for 21 days. So excuse me, I'll have to edit that bit out. Clear my throat. I don't know how he's going to do that. Sorry, Spencer.
He's going to work his magic.
Yeah. So, yeah, they've got to listen to that recording for 21 days, and that's so that what was once familiar becomes unfamiliar, and we're creating a new familiar within their mindset. So yeah, the mind always defers to what's familiar, and it's always going to defer to what's familiar.
Yeah. So the opposite of catastrophizing, if there is one, what is it? Or I was going to say, what's the antidote to it? But I think it is really the opposite.
Decatastrophizing. You have to decatastrophize, don't you?
Yeah.
There's a great book that I would definitely recommend if anybody is experiencing this at all. There's a great book called Feeling Great, and it's by Dr. David Burns, I think. And it's got some really good tools that help eliminate any negative thinking that feed depression and things like that. So yeah, that's definitely a go-to book that I would send anybody to if they tend to find that they're having a lot of negative thoughts. It's got some really great tools in there.
Okay, so Feeling Great, you said?
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, that's good. Always up for new book recommendations, I have to say. Yes, that's my my guilty pleasure, my habit that I just have no plan on giving up anytime soon, is acquiring new reading material.
Yeah. As before we depart, is there any other advice that you would offer anyone who tends to be prone to catastrophizing?
I suppose I would say look up Chicken Licken, have a look, see what Chicken Licken did, see how that turned out. No, I would really just want to say we have choice, don't we? And I hope that some of the techniques, like the worksheet that you mentioned around leaves on a stream, even if it's just saying to yourself, I notice I'm having the thought that XYZ, is about opening up options, hope, possibilities, and choice for us. And catastrophizing is rarely going to be a choice, I think, that people would consciously make. Once we get out that habit, it's something we can notice we're going there and choose something else instead.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for joining us, Justin. And
thank you.
I shall look forward to speaking with you again soon on the next episode, which I'm not quite sure what the topic is yet, but I'm sure it will be quite just as profound as this one.
I hope so too, and I'll try not to mention chicken licking next time.
Well, we had, what was the last one from the last episode? Was it what was the Disney film you mentioned in the last episode?
Oh, the Inside Out.
Inside Out, yeah. You see, we've got a new film every time. I'm going to look forward to the next film.
Yeah.
Film recommendations from Justin Standfield from the Calm Barn.
There we go.
Inside Out and Chicken Licking.
Very profound, absolutely. Right up there with all the greats like Citizen Kane and Casablanca.
Yeah.